just signal to the cupboard. What are we talking? What are we talking for a reset? A couple of minutes? Yeah, let's go ahead. If anyone's listening, we're just doing a reset because the cameras unfortunately aren't showing, so hopefully we'll have some video for you shortly. So thank you. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the meeting of the Audit and Standards Committee. Apologies for our delayed start there, and to those at home and watching this afterwards. Unfortunately, due to an issue with the cameras at the moment, this will be a radio broadcast only at this time, I'm afraid. But we are very grateful to the officers for ensuring we've got at least some form of streaming this evening, and that is unfortunately in the form of voice only. So a reminder to all members when this evening that obviously cameras won't pick you up, so let's ensure that we get as much spoken content as possible for informing the debate to the public at home. So item number 1, on to announcements. The meeting is being recorded and streamed and recorded for future publication on the Council's website. And a reminder to turn off your mobile phones or set them to silent, please, for the duration of this meeting. Item 2, apologies. I have apologies from Mr. Sonloa, Councillor Hocking and Councillor Tromans, who's on mayoral business. I understand there are a couple of other members that are, last one I heard were en route but have been delayed. So hopefully they will be joining us presently. Item number 3, to approve the minutes of some previous meetings. We'll take each meeting one in turn. So to start, please, to approve the minutes of the ordinary meeting of the Audit and Standards Committee held on the 9th of November 2021. Happy to propose. Seconded by Councillor Beetham. Any dissent? No, thank you. I will sign those as a true and accurate record. Second to that, we have to approve the minutes of the Subcommittee of the 20th of December. Happy to propose those as a true and accurate record. So seconder? Councillor Beetham. Point of order from Councillor Tromans. Councillor Condacor.
I'm not sure who you should apologise there, but I have not had obviously a copy of those in our pack.
Thank you. They've been circulated online and have been circulated to all members. So they've been proposed and seconded. I'll take a vote on these. Those in favour? Any against?
Chair, can you please record my vote that I voted against because it wasn't in the pack?
And any abstentions? That wouldn't be the case. So that is carried, and those have been declared a true and accurate record of the meeting, including by those actually present. Declarations of interest, item number 4. To receive any declarations of interest that are not included in the schedule. At this point, can I welcome Councillor Hartshorn to the authority following his by-election just before Christmas, and obviously his first meeting of the Audit and Standards Committee. I note, just to note, his interests are, like all members tonight, included in the pack. So just to draw everyone's attention to that. Any additional interest at this stage? No, thank you very much. Item number 5, public consultation. I've got a speaker on a number of items tonight, so I'm intending that we will just take the items and reports in order as they are on our agenda. Item number 6, the Mayor's Protocol. Report from the Director of Planning and Regulation, page 13 in our agendas. Philip.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Chair, this is a report which is to bring the Mayor's Protocol up to date. The contents of the protocol are attached as the Appendix A, which is attached to the report, and the areas that are of interest to the committee, those that have been amended or updated, are highlighted, and I'll explain why a little bit about the highlighting in a moment. But broadly speaking, Chair, the main change to the protocol, obviously, it's been updated to pick up some changes in officers, etc., in terms of job titles and things like that. In addition, and the key change that has been made is in connection with the civic car. So all references to the provision of a civic car and the chauffeur have been removed from the protocol to reflect the current arrangements which are set out principally Chair, in section, just bear with me whilst I find it, on page 23 of the agenda, you'll see section 9A3, which is entitled Civic Events and Transport. And that sets out the, if you like, the current arrangements that are in place now. There is provision for the mayor to have a budget to be expended as he or she sees fit, and that can be split at the mayor's discretion between civic events and transport. And principally, Chair, the expectation is that the mayor may wish to attend certain events with a chauffeur-driven vehicle, and they have the choice to do that. Otherwise, they may attend under their own steam, so they can drive themselves there if that's their desire. So those are the key changes, Chair. The only other thing to say, you'll see that the civic service and civic dinner have also been highlighted, and the reason for that is that the budgets for those specific events were withdrawn in 2019 and at the start of this year, respectively, and we've retained them in the protocol because the mayor does have the discretion to allocate some of that budget that's been allocated to the mayor to hold a civic dinner or a civic service. So I'm just flagging that there, Chair, for the attention of the committee. Chair, the recommendation is to approve the Appendix A as amended. And obviously, Chair, it will then be necessary to report the matter to full council for formal adoption and insertion into the Constitution.
Thank you for that, Philip. Yes, just to really highlight the point there, this particular item is effectively to tidy up what is already, by and large, the existing arrangement following the removal of the civic car and the savings. I think in there's some region of £20,000 with doing that, and those that is effectively we're sort of tidying up the language of the formal constitution, following on from what council has set in terms of budget and in terms of the savings that were taken from the mayoralty. So given that, then the recommendation is to approve the protocol as shown at Appendix A, and we recommend to council that the constitution be amended accordingly. In order for debate, I'll propose, is there a seconder? Councillor Beetham, thank you very much for that. Any member wish to speak? Councillor Beetham.
Thank you. So for me, I'm very much in favour of doing this, having cut down the significant chauffeur costs previously, and having done that into £5,000, it seems natural to give the mayor the choice of how to spend that £5,000. If it's up to him to prioritise, if perhaps there's less transport, let's say in a COVID year where events are restricted, like previously, so this allows him to delegate it as per his priorities, or perhaps his or her priorities, or if they decide to fund transport themselves, or whatever the case may be. So I'm very much for this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Beetham. Just to make a point of information for everybody here, I'm informed that the cameras now are working again following a reboot. So thank you to the IT team for that. Councillor Condacor.
Thank you, Chair. I've campaigned against the Mayor's car for probably about 12 years, so I'm really pleased that we no longer have it. One question I do have is there's some uncertainty over this transferring of the £5,000 budget, because it's coded as if it's for a chauffeur-driven car, and obviously we've had some mayors that haven't actually driven and would rely on taxis, for example. So I don't see why we explicitly even codify it as for chauffeur-driven car when it could actually be the mayor's transport budget, and then if they use M1 taxis or whichever taxi firm we've got that provides suitable service for yeah, we've got 5 or 6 taxi firms, so I wouldn't like it always to be codified as a chauffeur-driven car, but clearly for a few things like when we had the Gurkhas unveiling ceremony, when we had Joe Anna Lumley here, that might be the sort of occasion when you do want to get a car in and things. So that's one point. Two, it's always difficult to work out what the mayor's budget is, because there's all sorts of things that get wired from the general budgets for entertainment and corporate events into the mayor's and out of the mayor's thing. And we had at Scrutiny Committee someone picking up the overspend on the mayor's budget, and then someone saying, oh, it's not, because it hasn't been transferred to another budget. So it'd be useful if the mayor's protocol actually listed what the mayor's budget actually was, because we do also have civic gifts and all sorts of other things, which quite frankly in this day and age, really we should be thinking about not doing. I mean, these made in China free pens or badges, yeah, we should look at what we do in terms of the stuff given out by the mayoralty. And I mean, the mayoralty is really important, and I mean, a lot of places really separate it out. So I do not want to be interpreted as being against the mayoralty, but I do think it needs to be transformed to a modern age, effectively. Thank you, Chair.
Any other member? No? Excellent. Yeah, I think I like the fact that, as I say, we are now codifying, recommending to council the codification of what effectively is the policy that's been set by council anyway, and this will just change and make some of that much more clear, so that the position as is and as has been agreed is updated in the actual documents. So in that respect, it's effectively tidying up there. So proposed and seconded that we'll move this for the April Council. No further speakers. Many of those in favour? Those against? Any abstentions? That is carried with one abstention. Thank you. So that will be recommended to Council for April. Item number 7, the Code of Conduct, page 45 in your agenda pack. A report from Philip.
Yes, thank you, Chair. This is a case of déjà vu, really. The report refers to the Code of Conduct. The Audit and Standards Committee did, in fact, consider a Code of Conduct in March of this year, which was very much predicated upon all the Warwickshire districts and the County Council adopting a model code that was being advocated by the Local Government Association. The sense behind it was very much that there would be a single code that members could work to, and that you didn't, if you were a twin hatter, for example, you didn't sign up to one code for one authority and then a different code to a different authority, and therefore members knew where they were. That was Plan A. Unfortunately, Plan A didn't come off because in July the County Council decided to keep its existing code with modifications, and therefore that put us really in a position of, well, where do we go from here? The Constitution Review Working Party felt that the principle of having a uniform code between certainly ourselves and the County Council made sense, and therefore, as the County Council have stolen a march on us in terms of adopting their code with modifications, it made sense that we would follow in due course and follow suit, and therefore what you have before you is, as Appendix A, is the County Council's Code of Conduct. In discussions with the County Council's monitoring officer, Sarah Duxbury, she did say that the code did lack a certain element that the County Council felt they didn't need in their code, but which we as a district council or borough council would require, and that's in connection with the items that are covered in part in Appendix B, and which covered in Part B of the declarations of interest, and that's to do with, if you like, non-pecuniary interest that may affect particularly licensing and planning, where you may have a non-pecuniary interest in a matter which would actually require the member to declare and leave the room. So we would still need to add that to our code. The Constitution Review Working Party took that on board and therefore made the recommendation to come here that we adopt the County Council's code at Appendix A, but with the addition of those items in Appendix B. So that's the recommendation for you today, Chair.
Thank you very much. I have one public speaker on the matter, Mrs. Conacher.
Thank you. I'm quite pleased to see the sort of Nolan principles sort of more specified within the Code of Conduct. What I am concerned about is that there's absolutely nothing about the use of social media, and that does arise, cause a lot of issues as to who said what and to whom on social media. And I feel that there should be something in the Code of Conduct that actually specifies that, what people, what councillors or whatever say on social media should be exactly the same as they would be prepared to say in a meeting to that particular person. I say that particularly in light of what the chair of this committee said at the last meeting, the very end bit. He seemed to be concerned that, social media use was being monitored, etc., etc. I think that's quite concerning because as a sort of public figure, in effect, as a councillor, what you say on social media does matter, whether you say it as a private, you can't be a private person sort of separately to being a councillor. What you say is, relevant. It's, if you say, oh, I've been on a camping trip, obviously that doesn't matter, but things which are sort of political and things really do matter. The other thing I wanted to just raise was in the background bit on 3.3.3, says the best practice recommendations from the Committee for Standards in Public Life also recommend that principal authorities should review their code of conduct each year and regularly seek, where possible, the views of the public, community organisations and neighbouring authorities. Now, in all the time that I've been involved with coming to council meetings and things, I've never seen any sort of even attempt to get the views of the public and things. So I just wondered, what was happening about that? Why is that never sort of actually opened up to the public for comments? Thank you.
Thank you. Philip wanted to just respond back.
Yes, thank you, Chair. If I could just deal with the first point, the social media, there is a separate guidance in the Constitution for members on social media, which covers that. And in fact, the County Council have a similar document. Certainly, it's something that at some point or other this committee will look to review as part of its normal programme of review. So the social media point will be picked up again, but it does make the points that Mrs. Kandaka has referred to about ensuring that members are very mindful of what they say on social media, because as public figures, what they say can and will be used against them in certain circumstances. In terms of the best practice recommendations, obviously this is effectively a new recommendation that's come from the Committee on Standards in Public Life in their report in 2019. I think it was published in 2020. So this is our first go, if you like, at reviewing the Code of Conduct. Initially, the plan would have been to have adopted the LGA code. The LGA had committed to reviewing their code each year on behalf of all the authorities. Now, what we would do, Chair, as part of our arrangements would be to look and see what the LGA are doing and then obviously bring recommendations forward to this committee. And of course, this committee could then choose, if it so wished, to take a sounding from the public at large on that. If we are going down the road of adopting the county's code, then of course we can do that in tandem with the county as well. So it's something that will get picked up in the future, and it's not happened in the past because we've not had that requirement until the report that came out from the Committee on Standards in Public Life.
Thank you very much. So to start debate, move the recommendation that it be recommended to Council, the code be set out in Appendix A, be adopted subject to the amendments and the additions in Appendix B. Is there a seconder? Councillor Hartshorn, thank you very much. Any member wish to speak? Councillor Downs.
Thank you, Chair. On the the topic of social media, I find it really surprising, to be honest with you, that we are public figures. Yeah, I totally agree with that. But I've got a personal Facebook page that my family and friends are on. Now, if I want to say something on my personal Facebook page, that's absolutely fine, you know. It's not as if I'm calling anybody, you know, I don't know, National Socialist or anything, you know. It's down to me what I do on that personal Facebook page. If I choose to have a councillor Facebook page, that's completely separate. So as far as I'm concerned, from the social media side, I don't think our personal social media should be monitored, or we should have to be careful of what we say on there. I just don't think it's right, because let's face it, we're all human beings, aren't we? Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Downs. Councillor Conacher.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think actually part of this distinction between personal accounts and county council accounts does happen with many councillors, and some do actually explicitly have two accounts, and some people have a account they put everything on. But it is a very difficult area, because obviously if you have a personal account, you may comment on a councillor or what the councillor's doing still. So it is a grey area, and I think it is useful for people to be careful. On public things, I think it is useful for the public to get engaged in revising this consultation, code of conduct. And also, I think one thing that's caused a lot of problems at the county council, and in fact, I think 2 out of the 3 standards complaints in my 8 years as a county council I heard about, was about confidential information. And I think that needs to maybe be a bit stronger, because obviously we quite often have things on pink papers. There's been some occasions when people have discussed voting to put the pink papers into public, but also there's people mention things then and can actually accidentally break the code of conduct because they mention something about things that are on pink paper that aren't the confidential bit. And I think one thing the councils quite often do to avoid these problems with confidentiality is actually produce a shorter report or a minute, so that people actually know what they can say, rather than actually have, because quite often, yeah, if it's say the hotel development, you don't want to fall foul of our code of conduct because you're talking about the new hotel development, and obviously a lot of information is in the pink papers, but you may only want to talk about general principles. So I think it is useful for a bit of a guidance note on confidentiality, because I say it's the only thing that seems to have tripped up people at the county council, which generally had a very good standards regime. And I say I'll leave it there, and I will sort of vote for this. But I say I do think we want a bit of public consultation when it gets revised, and also we want to look at confidentiality. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Beetham.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chair. So I, for one, do support this as a member of the Working Party as well, which had to look at this, the slimming down of our constitution to go along with this, as it brings it to fewer pages. It brings us up to a higher standard that we can be expected to hold account to, in line with County Council, which, as a twin hatter, having the same high standards will make it a lot easier for us to do our duty to a high standard, be held account by the council as the public would expect us to be held to when it's not an election year where they would have the ultimate say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Beetham. Yes. I think whilst this report obviously is being taken in its isolation, there are other reports coming forward tonight that would actually, we'll touch on it. So if there was an alleged breach of the code, for example, and whether there was intent and value for money to look at, those sort of items will come later. So I think, yes, we have to consider this report in its isolation, but there are other background items that are due on later on the agenda tonight that will actually sort of fit into place, a bit like a puzzle, really, puzzle pieces. So if there are no further speakers, it's been proposed and seconded. Is there any dissent? No, that has been passed, and again we'll get that to the April full council. Agenda item number 8, which is the voluntary recall scheme. This was an item that was requested. Audit and Standards had previously requested the Constitutional Review Working Party look at and have a paper on, and effectively this paper has now come back to us following some of their work. So got a report from the Director of Planning and Regulation. I've probably stolen his thunder. Philip.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Really, I can't add much more to what you've just said in your introduction. We've looked at the Kingston upon Thames scheme, which is a voluntary scheme. There's no statutory basis for it, and it does set out certain parameters for when a local petition can be raised against an elected member where, for example, they haven't attended a certain number of meetings within the year and therefore not represented their constituents. The view of the Working Party is that whilst they can see some merit in it, without the force of statute behind it, it lacks any real teeth, and therefore the recommendation that is before you is to suggest a letter to be sent to the Secretary of State requesting that legislative time be made available to pass legislation to give the same principles as with the recall of MPs, with suitable criteria for so that members of the public can then initiate a recall petition in those circumstances. So that's the recommendation, Chair, is that we write to Michael Gove and request that legislation be passed that would give effect to this proposal.
Thank you, Philip. I've got no public speakers on this item, so I will move, as the recommendation has on the agenda, the joint letter be sent from myself as chair of the committee and the leader of the council to the Secretary of State, seeking the introduction of a national recall scheme for local councillors. Effectively, the scheme sort of as per Parliament parameters, and but obviously for local councillors. Is that fine? A seconder? Councillor Beetham, thank you. Any member wish to speak? Councillor Beetham, thank you.
Brilliant, thank you, Chair. So again, I'm glad to see this being put forward, as holding councillors to account is incredibly difficult unless there is an election where, as I said on a previous item, the electorate are the ultimate ones to decide. Again, it is us wanting to bring up a higher standard, to be held to a higher standard, but sadly that we are lacking statutory powers to back it. So this letter from both yourself and the leader, I think, be very appreciated to the Secretary of State. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Beetham. Councillor Conacher.
I find it quite incredible, Chair, that we are spending time doing this to actually get rid of a councillor. I can't think of any councillor in my time on this council that would need to have a petition to get rid of them, apart from myself, because I upset the previous Labour administration, and I fear this will now be used by the current Conservative administration to get rid of me at some time. So I understand why Parliament does this. It's very important, and it's also very important it has safeguards. So the main thing is, obviously, people have committed a criminal offence above a certain threshold. But also there's this issue of a committee of the Commons and a report, etc., and the standard system at the Commons. And we know all the problems that has had, but it does actually mean occasionally MPs resign. But there's checks and balances in that, which are very, very unlikely to exist in a small district council. So unless there is some external mechanism to actually prevent a large group of whatever party deciding to run a ballot to suspend a single member and throw them off the council, I think it's a very dangerous and backward step for democracy. We have elections every 4 years. I have to convince the people of Wellington that I work hard for them, and I'm not a raving lunatic. And I get elected to this council. That should be the judge as to whether me or any other minority councillor stays on this council. To actually have the ability for a large group who will dominate a standards committee to actually vote to have a petition, and then the poor members subjected to this petition then having to fight for their political life, is totally abhorrent. What sort of council will we need to be for this to be an important thing for a council to do, to get rid of their critics? I totally understand getting rid of councillors who've committed criminal offences, but to actually have a recall system that can be triggered by the controlling group, I think is, well, it's just unbelievable you're even wasting time on it. And I think it's a very backward step. Thank you, Chair.
Clearly someone hasn't read the principles. Thank you very much. Any other member? No. Well, let's just be clear what actually is on, having actually read the Kingston upon Thames. It is effectively those rules that are set out for the Commons, in the addition of someone that's failed to attend a collective number of meetings per committee that they sit on, rather than our system is, as long as you turn up once per 6 months under the law, you are eligible to remain a councillor. That can be one meeting of anything. You can be substituted in and your clock resets. The Kingston upon Thames model was that, whilst voluntary and therefore agreeing that wouldn't necessarily work, we could do with some more teeth to it. But that model was that if your attendance dropped below 25% on any committee on which you are a member of as a singularity. So if your attendance on audit and standards dropped below 25%, if your attendance at council dropped below 25%, if you were a member of said part. Other than that, it was for things like committed of criminal offences and custodial sentences, and it was those kind of elements. This is not some lefty communist utopia that others might like to live in, but actually about ensuring that there are checks and balances to allow the electorate where something goes terribly wrong, and if those conditions at Kingston were met and if they were statutory, something would have gone terribly wrong without any sort of balance. And actually, from the Kingston on Thames model, Kingston on Thames, there was actually safeguards in there for the attendance levels dipping below 25% if there was extraordinary reasons for that, which is included things like health of yourself, your closest and your nearest and dearest. So there were other safeguards and checks and balances built into that. But I think that's a bit academic at the moment, because the principle of being able to have some form of recall, particularly for those most serious offences, is something that we desperately need, and that without the weight of statute would not necessarily have the desired effect. So whilst I agree with colleagues that put it forwards to go to the working party, the principles are sound, but in practice the ability for us to carry it out at this stage is not. So we already have proposed and seconded that the letter go to the Secretary of State. As all those in favour? Five. Those against? One.
Please record my vote, please.
And abstentions, 1. So that is carried. Thank you. Now come to agenda item number 9, which is a recommendation again from the Constitution Review Working Party in relation to e-petition schemes, something again I know that this committee was keen to put on their agenda, and I'm very grateful that they have managed to bring that back to us in relatively quick time. A report from the Director of Planning and Regulation, Philip.
Yes, thank you, Chair. broadly speaking, this is quite a simple amendment to the existing petition scheme, simply to say that the council will accept e-petitions. There was, if I go back in history, in the Local Government and Public Involvement in Health Act 2009, a statutory duty was introduced that required all local authorities to have an e-petition scheme. But around that time, there was an indication that if there was a change in government in 2010, that duty would be withdrawn. So at that time, the council didn't introduce an e-petition scheme and waited to see. As it was, there was a change in government, and the Localism Act actually removed that specific duty. Since then, however, Chair, obviously e-petitions have taken off, and a lot of our local authority neighbours do accept e-petitions. And the only way to do that effectively and securely is through an e-petition scheme system, so that there is a proper validation process. Bearing in mind, of course, that with e-petitions you can actually do a petition from the other side of the world just through the internet. So there does need to be some validation process which can be automated. What we have done, Chair, is change the protocol. That is before you in the appendix. I think you put it twice. But as well as that, Chair, you'll note that there is a proposal that the e-petitions either be either from well, if I say that there's a proposal that we have our own system in place, and I'll deal with that in a moment, or via change.org, which is I think it's an American system, in fact, that is available. So at the moment, if you look on page 65, you'll see that there is a proposal that the council accepts e-petitions from change.org or an MBBC-led scheme, and that's the proposal that's before you. I can say, Chair, that when we discussed this at the working party, we were discussing whether we would be able to procure a bespoke system or have something linked in with something like a committee system like modern.gov, which is what the county council have, which does have a module for e-petitions. As it is, when we raised this with our IT colleagues, they were under the impression that in fact the existing firm step system can accommodate an e-petition scheme and system, and in fact I think it was Borough Council in Lancashire had done this, and so we have set up on test an e-petition system on firm step. Now unfortunately I had hoped that both yourself and Councillor Beetham, who were on the working party, would be able to test that. Unfortunately, because it's within the firewall on test, you can't. But what my IT colleague has done is he's provided us with a video which I've sent through to you. If you're happy, Chair, I'll circulate that to all members of the committee so they can see it. It does set it out how it would work, and it's something that you may wish to consider. As it is at the moment, we are still suggesting change.org or a council-led system, but we may want to go just for the council-led system in due course to simplify matters, if you think that will cut the mustard, so to speak. So the recommendation, Chair, is to is as set out in the report, that we introduce the e-petition scheme on a pilot basis, and as you'll see that obviously we'll seek delegated authority to look at options, but if you think that the in-house option, which would obviously be cost neutral, cost free, is okay, then we would not need to do that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We have one member of the public, Mrs. Condacor.
Thank you. Well, obviously, e-petitions are the way to go. I mean, in the modern world, it seems crazy not to. But this actual item that's come forward seems rather confused and gives me the impression that it's been rather rushed. and there are a lot of things which are incorrect within it. I mean, just for example, on the recommendations, 2.2 says delegate authority to the director in consultation with the chair, and what have you, to consult on a MBBC-led e-petition scheme for the council. And yet the next thing is to approve the amended petition scheme and to recommend that it's amended and things. So that in itself is already confused. But just in terms of sort of working through, the things which would be in the Constitution just are very, very mixed. Because if you actually look on the Warwickshire site, they've actually got a whole thing for what would happen for a standard handwritten petition and what would happen for an e-petition. And the things are not the same. Because, for example, 5K 2.3, what will the petitions officer do when he or she receives your petition? And G is rejecting the petition. Well, on an e-petition, you actually have to have it approved that it's a reasonable thing beforehand, so that doesn't apply. So it seems a bit contradictory. 2.2 on that says, C, each signatory to a petition must state their full name, full postal address and signature. You can't put a signature on an e-petition. It just doesn't work like that. It's on your email address and things. So I think there's nothing about who could sign these petitions. As Philip's already mentioned, things on change.org or whatever and things can be signed by anyone across the whole world. So if you want it that only people in the borough can sign and things, you need to have something different. It says in the blurb that the petitioner, whoever sort of instigated the petition, would have to then print off something to hand into the council if it's like from an outside organisation and things. Change.org and things. I can't remember exactly when I first signed a petition and things, what details I gave them, but they're not going to give you all the details of people's names and addresses and things. That just with GDPR and data protection, it just wouldn't work. So there are an awful lot of things in here that just don't actually all add up. So I'm very in favour of e-petitions and things, but I do feel that you actually need to go back and more slowly work through and iron out all the little gremlins, and there are a lot of them in there. Thank you.
Thank you. To enable debate, I'll move the recommendations at 2 on the agenda. Seconded. Thank you, Councillor Kenner. Any member wish to speak? Councillor Condacor.
Thank you, Chair. This has been knocking around for some considerable time, and then it was put to bed when Labour said we're not doing it. A long while ago. I think Sam Margrave was chairing standards in those days. So it's great it's come back. Really support having e-petitions, but there are a few technical things we need to get right. One of the things that went wrong at the county with e-petitions and this sort of type of thing is sometimes people knowing who presented the petition, because obviously it is sort of data stuff, which is why I think an in-house one is better, because the person forming the petition then will actually give you all their contact details, and the logistics of it would work better. You don't get this petition that's been created and you don't know how to contact the organiser. I think feedback is really important. Sometimes we've had petitions, paper ones, where the person who's organised a petition isn't kept updated with what's going on with it, so it might go to a scrutiny committee and they're not told to come to the scrutiny committee, you can talk for 3 minutes. There's been a lot of sort of admin-y type things going wrong. And I think the other thing we need to get right is the standing of who can sign a petition. We had a long while ago a mayor who had particular views on Halloween, and he caused some eruptions. And it's really important that if we're having petition systems where we've got these thresholds, that if someone actually does something of national significance, that our petition system only counts people with standing. But we do need to include people who run businesses, the market traders, the shops, people with a small garage. It shouldn't necessarily be just people who live in the borough who can sign and eat in a bed of petitions, but also people who work in the borough, own businesses in the borough. So I do think it'd be useful to sort of flesh out a few of these things. But I'm massively in favour, and I would like to do the beta trial. I don't know if the officers can arrange that, so that we can all iron out all the silly things that go wrong. I think it was very useful, some of the stuff we do with Glendale, and I think the same thing should be done here. We should beta test it with a few members who are IT savvy and a few members who aren't IT savvy to make sure that it works well. Thank you, Chair.
Just before I call Councillor Beetham, can I just actually at this point put on record thanks to the officers that have worked really hard to try and build this back end of the system. As Philip says, I've had a video on this last night and a couple of screenshots last night, and from what I've seen of it thus far seems to be quite good, which is why I'm glad the recommendation will keep that delegated authority in. And if we can get that working by the time this comes to council, and I think absolutely it is right that our in-house system that we've got that bit more control of should be the preferential point. But I think if we can't do that, we need to be accepting petitions, and we need to get moving with this. In that respect, that's probably a bit of justification for that 2.2 there, just for members to be informed. So, you know, if we can get this up and running by April, by the time we're recommending to council, then obviously we will just obviously in consultation with the portfolio holder and the monitoring officer will obviously bring that forward in that respect. The reason obviously for the portfolio holder for finance and corporate is A, it's a corporate function, but B, at the time when the working party met, there were some more hypotheticals as to whether there may or may not be costs elements involved in adding an in-house system, and you know, obviously since the work that's been taken on behind the scenes after that shows that there is not. So I'm sure Councillor Croft will be very happy not to be spending out more money on democracy. But it's just important, I think, to just put that little bit of context in there. So thank you for members for that. Councillor Beetham.
Thank you again, Chair. So, yet again, best thanks to all the officers who have been working on the in-house e-petitions so far, considering I believe the working party was in December when we said we would like to have a look at internal. And if not, that's why we had the option of the third party change.org. And it was only last night that we received quite far advanced version of the petition site via video, and I do believe that should be shared with committee going forward. And when it does come to council, I do hope that it is a good standard by then and we are able to go internal. However, there should be that option there for third party. We do not want to dither and delay further with getting this council into the 21st century when it comes to petitions. Another change which may have not been noted by people perhaps viewing at home is we are lowering what I would consider, and many residents would consider, a ridiculous 3,000 signature limit for it to be brought to full council to a more reasonable 750, which when you compare it to Warwickshire County Council, which is a larger authority, their minimum is 1,000 for it to go to council. So I'm glad to see that we're finally able to have that public participation. As councillors, it's very important that we also hear what's changing during our terms, and petitions are a good way to hear that. And yeah, I fully support this going forward. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Beetham, and thank you for drawing attention to the changes in the limits before things hit, and the vast reduction in those to get hopefully get some more public participation in our borough. Did I see a hand from Councillor Kenner? Councillor Kenner.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm more than happy to support these recommendations. I think, as Councillor Beetham says, this brings the council into the 21st century when it comes to petitioning the council, and also on the lowering of the limits, it brings democracy closer to the people of the borough, and it lets residents set the council's agenda if they so wish. So I'm more than happy to support all the recommendations in the report. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other member? Councillor Rudkin.
Thank you, Chair. Just to echo really what's been said, I'm more than happy to support this. I look forward to seeing the video when it's sent out, and I'm really pleased to see the lowering of of the signatures that are required for it to go to council. I'm really pleased about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rookin. Just for the public record, obviously I was nodding away when Philip asked earlier about whether it should be circulated to all members, and yes, that is very clear that all members should be circulated the video. So just to put that on full record rather than just the Churchill nodding dog. So it's been proposed and seconded to accept the petition scheme. Is there any dissent? No, that is carried then. Thank you. Agenda item 10, the complaints procedure. The report from this is a report back from the subcommittee, whose minutes we signed off earlier, following their meeting in December, where we as a whole committee asked the subcommittee to look at in detail the complaints procedure. I can assure you it went through line by members there and officers as well, and thank you for their wonderful work in the notations of those as we were going through literally line by line, which is as legislation should be done. So this is a report back with recommendations following that meeting in December. So in terms of the formal report, I'll ask Philip to present, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just to pick up that point, what we have here is it follows on really from the discussions in connection with the County Council's Code of Conduct. What we've also taken to do is adopt the County Council's procedures, which broadly reflect the same sort of things that we do here, but obviously in a much more succinct and simple fashion. There are some key changes, though, that need to be highlighted. I think the first is, obviously, that the proposal here for the initial assessment is effectively a throwback to an earlier bygone age under the Standards Board, and the suggestion is that we actually have an assessment subcommittee. The benefit of that is that it is placing the assessment back with elected representatives rather than me as monitoring officer, which, to be fair, is like the sort of Damocles hanging over me when considering whether or not something merits investigation or not. There are, though, Chair, some particularly useful bits in from the county scheme that I think we should highlight. And I think it's if you look at page 75, and I'm just over halfway down, there is a rubric there in bold which says we will only refer a complaint for investigation if the following criteria are met. And the first one there would actually be something that we don't have in our current scheme, and that is that it's serious enough if proven to justify the cost of an investigation. And I flagged that because clearly we have had to incur some quite significant costs in the last couple of years in terms of investigation costs, principally because we've had to outsource complaints, partly because of the number, partly because we've had a lack of resource within the team to be able to deal with those, and that has been at cost, and therefore it is something that I think does merit consideration by this committee, because clearly not everything that is investigated probably merited investigation, but it is something that the initial assessment said had to happen. So that will give, if you approve this will give the assessment subcommittee the ability to consider that as part of the regime and decide whether in fact something does actually necessarily merit further investigation. The other thing to flag is the third bullet point there, which again we do not have, but which I think would be welcomed, and that is that we have no, if you like, statute of limitations on complaints. So we at the moment have no specified period. We do say that if it's so old as to be pointless, then we won't investigate it. But of course, that's a relative term. It's difficult to be precise. And clearly, some cases may well merit investigation given the seriousness of them. So by introducing that, it does give some finality to the process and does, I think, assist and will assist the assessment subcommittee to come to a view. In terms of the assessment subcommittee itself, if I can draw attention on page 77 to the composition, it is proposed, and this is, again, this is reflecting what we had previously, that any 3 elected members of the Audit and Standards Committee will sit as an assessment subcommittee. It does say it will be politically balanced, picking up a point that Councillor Kandaka made earlier, and will, where possible, and there was quite a lot of debate at the subcommittee about this to make sure that this went in, that at least one member of the opposition political group is represented on the on that to get some balance. So and I mention that really to pick up Councillor Kandaka's concerns in connection with the member recall scheme, that this is actually something that's intended to try and rationalise the process and possibly deal more effectively than now with some of the complaints that are coming through. I'm happy to take questions on this, Chair, but obviously you were at the subcommittee, so you're well aware of these matters.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Philip. And I think one of the other things, I think, just to, at this stage, where we bring the public in to draw attention to, is also, I think, an emphasis on informal resolutions as a preferred outcome where possible. You know, there are instances, as far as I'm aware, that people have never even been asked, would you be willing to apologise, or would you be willing to clarify? You know, let's say an email went out from a member and it was potentially, there was interpretation, it was interpreted one way by a resident and meant a different way by a councillor. That could very quickly be cleared up with, terribly sorry, I actually meant it sort of more like this, I'm sorry it came across like this, matter closed. Rather than having this system whereby, seemingly at the moment, we're never asked about informal resolution. It's a complaint comes in, it goes straight for assessment, and it goes through this whole, at the moment, given obviously the reasons set out by the monitoring officer, this whole expensive process to the local authority, when actually it potentially could have been dealt with at zero cost at the beginning. So particularly pleased to see some greater impact and impetus put on that as well. So bringing the member of the public, Mrs. Condacor, I have to speak.
Thank you. I mean, there are a lot of things to sort of bring up on this and things. I mean, I do actually agree with you that sort of informal action could quite often sort of, you know, resolve some of the very more minor things. But a lot of this wording does give me a lot of cause for concern. Sort of, on the first bit, the complaint will be submitted to the assessment subcommittee for consideration. A copy of the report will be sent to the subject member at that time. The report will be submitted as an exempt item, but the subject member may attend the meeting. Now, surely the complainant needs to be sent the report as well, and also the complainant should be able to be there and give their side of the story, because it's sometimes very difficult to put down in writing, you know, why you're aggrieved about something, but it's a lot easier to say it verbally. So I think there needs to be both sides being able to put their side of the story. I'm concerned about where appropriate, the monitoring officer may also consult an independent person. Surely, if it's gone beyond the sort of informal action and things, an independent person should actually give a view, because, you know, quite often it was going to be councillors, you know, looking at councillors, and particularly if you're on the same team, so to speak, you're going to be in favour of your friends. And that's why I'm actually really concerned about the composition of the subcommittees, because with the best will in the world, everyone's human beings. And if you've got more of your own team, for want of a better term to use, it's human nature to defend your friends. So I really don't, you know, politically balanced. It may be politically balanced in terms of the numbers actually on the council. But this is in effect like a jury, and you'd never have on a jury someone who's got any connection with the case. So I'm very concerned by that bit. In the wording here, I mean, we will only refer... I mean, you can't have that sort of wording in the thing. It's got to be the committee will. And it's indicative of rules being written to suit those writing them, I'm afraid to say. I mean, the bit about serious enough if proven to justify the cost of an investigation. Now, I can understand that to a certain extent, but I'm very concerned that it will mean that sort of financial considerations will come much higher than actually the rights of someone who's feeling very aggrieved. In the next, you won't normally refer complaints for investigation whether we believe it to be malicious, relatively minor. Now, that's a real sort of vague term, and, you know, who decides that? Because what's minor to someone isn't to another. And if you don't deal with the minor incidents, it's emboldened people to get more nasty and what have you, and what they're, you know, going to say. I've got a lot more to say, but obviously my 3 minutes have run out.
Thank you very much. So to enable debate, I will move the recommendations that, again, the procedures the procedure be approved as shown in Appendix A, and it be recommended to Council that the Constitution be amended accordingly. Is it seconded? Councillor Downs, thank you. I'd just add at this point, as I say, as Philip said, this is based largely upon the County Council's the County Council's code as is, and if I remember correctly, and I'm happy to be corrected by members that were there, I think the two sections about only refer a complaint to investigation and not normally refer a complaint for investigation were, I think, unaltered from the County Council's version from memory. So this is not something that we here have come up with. So on that point, any member wish to speak? Councillor Downs.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think this is a major step forward for the council, personally. I think it's going to save us a vast amount of money on not having to spend the money on frivolous items. But there's one thing that I would like to raise is the statute limitation. 6 months, really? Do we really need 6 months, 180 days? Where someone can wake up on a damp Tuesday morning and go, well, actually, I really didn't like what Councillor Kenneth said to me 5.5 months ago. I'm going to put a complaint in. Where? No, go and have your pity party elsewhere. If you can't get it in 3 months, 12 weeks, go away. That's my view. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Downs. Councillor Condacor.
Thank you, Chair. On that last point, I think maybe 3 months unless there's extenuating circumstances, because sometimes there are reasons why things can happen promptly. I am concerned this is a case of marking your own homework, though. We've got this with Parliament at the moment with a certain person setting an inquiry up and then being the person the inquiry reports to. And I do think there's a danger of this subcommittee just basically rejecting anything from anyone who's complaining about the controlling group. And people have to remember as councillors that one day you're the controlling group and a decade later you're the opposition. So it's a good idea to make sure there's checks and balances in things. And we've also got the issue, it's not clear as to whether the screening committee will be the same as the hearing committee, because in which case you can end up with the same person on the jury repeatedly. And also, I mean, I've been on standards for a lot of my 9 years in the council. I've never served on a standards committee. I think it could always be the case of the same couple of councillors being the screening party if we don't have some randomising things, which I think would also help actually making it less of people marking their own homework. So I think if we have this screening committee done wrong, it will actually always screen out complaints of a certain type, and it will actually become the point where it will never be worth anyone putting a complaint in against the council unless it's a complaint against an opposition councillor. We also have the issue about confidentiality, because complainants quite often have all sorts of reasons why they're complaining, which they may have confidential or private information in, and quite often they'll get attacked if they put a complaint in against Councillor X. If Councillor X's friends are on the screening committee, can read the complaint and aren't bound by any confidentiality. So I'm at the point where, without the independent people looking at this and enough rotation of members and safeguards, I would say no one should ever use this complaints procedure, because it is just A, not going to give you an outcome you think you deserve, and B, it will not protect your data, and you'll be attacked. I've been a county council for 8 years. We had a very effective system there because the monitoring officers did a lot of work in screening out complaints. I think we only had 1 complaint per year, sometimes 0 complaints per year. And I think it was non-politicised. At the county council, people would complain very, very occasionally against a member of the controlling group, and they'd apologise. Yeah, the complaints procedure at the county council worked because it was very, very non-political. And I think it's partly probably a tribute to the leader of county council and the officers there, that they actually run quite an efficient system that actually looks at the matter of what the complaint is. And they're very rare complaints, but they're very effectively dealt with. And I do really fear that this can be quite a political system, where a very small committee, which might always have the same members on, screening out the same things. And I think the test will be, if at the end of your 3 years, or whatever, your 5 years, however long you're in office, how even-handed the complaints procedure is. So I do think there needs to be some reporting on how many complaints have been screened out, and some matrices. Just because if the screening committee meets in private and the outcome is private, you don't even know that the screening committee is going around screening out complaints against X, Y or Z. So I'm very, very worried about this. I would like my vote against this recorded. I think we need to depoliticise complaints. I think we need less complaints. And I do think we need lots less of the tick-for-tat general aggro we have as councillors. It was a pleasure being a county councillor because people treated each other with respect. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Before I call Councillor Beetham, I just want to actually set the record straight with fact. At the moment, if the monitoring officer, in conjunction with an independent person, screens out a complaint, it is reported to us, I think it's bi-yearly, on pink paper as a Audit and Standards Committee. That would not change. So if the panel screened out a complaint in the same way a monitoring officer could in the current system, that would still be reported to Audit and Standards on pink bi-yearly, as is now. In addition, the raving for the county system, this effectively is the county system with an addition of an assessment subcommittee. That is the real key change, and an extra about trying to have informal resolution as well. So let us debate on fact, not on fiction. And can I also say that I am very pleased that I was the one to really push forward this idea that actually, even if a subcommittee would be politically balanced with 3 members from a single party, which in recent years, had this system been in place, would have happened at one point in the past, then there would still be an opposition voice on that committee, guaranteed to it through the standing orders. And I think that is absolutely right for our democracy, and it's a great check and balance to ensure that we actually have that proportionality. So let's deal in fact, please, when we're debating this. Councillor Beetham.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm sad to hear that Councillor Kondaka said that if this was implemented, he would say to people not to go through the complaints process. I'm sure that's probably not exactly what he meant. As if there is a complaint, I'd hope that anyone would put themselves forward to make that complaint if they believe that a councillor is going against the Code of Conduct. In regards to selection of the committee, I believe as is how the hearing is currently done, it is done by council officers who, as we know, are not party political. Just like that clarity is there as well. And I thoroughly support this as the filtering is a large, not problem, but a large issue at the moment in regards to some complaints going through perhaps when they shouldn't and costing the taxpayer money. I asked officers earlier this week for some financial figures in regards to it. And over the last 3 years, initial assessments going externally, which does not include any of the current ongoing, comes to 5,140 over the last 3 years. When we have a look at investigation costs for the last three years, again, not looking at the ongoing ones, it's £22,907.50, which as taxpayers' money, we need to be guarded. So I'm glad to see that there is that value for money in the initial. So but that's not to say that anyone's complaints would just be, if it's severe enough and everything else, a complaint should still be made and heard out. And I'm not sure about other parties, but when it comes to hearings and standards, there is no whipping within the Conservative Party. If we believe that one of our colleagues have done wrong, and we haven't said to them in private, in that hearing or anything within this chamber, we will say so. And I know that the opposition in regards to also have had similar occurrences of going against any party line in regards to hearings. So I'd hope that would still continue for any other party, but I know for a fact that I would go even against, as the member of the public, Mrs. Kondakar, said, my own team. So thank you, and if I could just get some clarity in regards to who selects the composition of the panel, and just make sure I am correct there. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So, as with the subcommittee, names are requested of volunteers that would be able to suit and what date or time and availability they may have. Once it is, they are presented to the officers who request it. Once it has been found date or time that has the requisite number that can do and can attend, it is then through delegated authority powers that the head of paid service, the chief executive, uses those powers to effectively call those members for the hearing, or actually the hearing or the or the assessment subcommittee, as would be set up under these proposals. So hopefully that answers Councillor Beetham's question there. Any further members? Anything you wanted to on that point? Are you happy with that answer?
No, I'm happy with that.
Thank you. Councillor Condacor.
Can I just come back on question that in terms of, because one of my points was, is it going to be a separate set of 3 that do the hearing to actually do the pre-selection? Because it's that rotation that randomises it, so the same person doesn't effectively have 2 votes on an issue.
Yeah, I'll let the monitoring officer come in on this one.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I mean, obviously at the assessment stage, there is a complaint, and that is broadly it. As far as the assessment subcommittee is concerned, that will be what will be presented to them, and that is what they will be asked to consider, whether that complaint indicates a breach, and if so, how serious a breach. I think we would, if where we possibly could, we would try and avoid having the same members on the assessment subcommittee as on the dealing with any hearing. However, that may not be possible. But, and I would say that I would stress this, Chair, what would be coming forward to Audit and Standards Committee, if the matter were referred for investigation, will be a full report with evidence and witness statements. So there is a much more contextual decision to be made, which the assessment subcommittee will not have had. So I guess, as with any issue of bias or predetermination, the question that would have to be asked of the members on the both Audit and Standards Committee, and ultimately if it goes to a hearing, is have you still got an open mind? Are you still capable of judging this on its facts? And if that is the case, then that is perfectly acceptable for those members then to participate in both the Audit and Standards Committee meeting and the subsequent hearing. So I don't think you've got an issue there. I think it's a theoretical issue, but in practice it just doesn't present itself simply because the information will not be there at the assessment stage.
Yes, thank you. I'd also note that those that are sitting at assessment stage are asking whether or not an investigation should or should not be carried out. They're making no judgment. In the same way that Audit and Standards as a whole committee is asked to send it to a hearing, and yet it'll be from the committee of us that is drawn up a subcommittee to hear anyway, even under the current circumstances and rules. So, you know, whilst it would be in a lovely and an ideal world to have different people on different ones, the realities are that there may or may not be the possibility for that. People may not feel comfortable on the complaint side, so may not put themselves forward. There are a whole host of reasons that may or may not happen. But in the same way that at the moment we will hear, as we have 2 items before us this evening, and we will have to decide whether or not those go through to a hearing or not, the likelihood is that those of us sat in this room will vote yay or nay, and if we voted yay to a hearing, we would still then be sat on that hearing. So, no, you know, let's be clear on that. If it's good enough for a whole committee, it is certainly no problem for a subcommittee, which is formulated as required. So, I think that's an important distinction to make. There was one other item I was going to mention, but it escaped me. Anyway. So we have proposed and seconded that the procedure as be approved as shown in Appendix A, and we'll bring it to April Council and recommend it to them that the Constitution be amended accordingly. Those in favour? 6. Those against? Against, and that's 1. That therefore is carried. Now we come to item number 11, which is any other items. I don't have any other items at this stage. So then we come to item number 12, the exclusion of the public and press. I note the items coming up to us in 13 and 14 that the subject members aren't here. And so obviously can't give it a preference whether they do or do not wish to sit in public or private, just to note that for the meeting. So on that basis I will move, as per section 100A4 of the Local Government Act 1972, the public and press be excluded from the meeting during consideration of the following exempt items, being likely that the disclosure of exempt information of the description specified in paragraph 1 and 2 of part 1 schedule 12A of the Act, and given that the 2 individuals are not here to express any opinion to the contrary, and I've not had any formal indication from them to the contrary either. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Kenner, thank you. Any member wish to speak? No. Those in favour? Those against? An abstention? 2 abstentions. Thank you very much. That is carried. If we could please halt the live stream now. And thank you very much to members of the public at home for joining us.